Number 1. Spartan slave hunts. Moving over to ancient Sparta, where the idea of sports and games was essentially the opposite of safe. The krypteia was a brutal and secretive ritual that young Spartan men participated in to prove themselves worthy. Think of it as a mix of military training, hazing ritual, and homicidal scouting mission. The Spartans would take their most promising teenage boys, usually the strongest and most ruthless, and send them into the countryside with only a knife and minimal supplies. Their mission: to survive alone in the wild, to kill any Spartan slaves they encountered. These helots were not popular in Sparta, partly because they outnumbered the Spartans by a lot. The krypteia wasn't just a game, it was a method of controlling the slave population through sheer terror. At night, the young Spartans would sneak into slave villages and kill those deemed a threat, specifically anyone who showed signs of leadership or rebellion. It was both a sport and a rite of passage designed to weed out the weak and reward cunning brutality. Imagine being 16 years old and being told, "All right, time for your big test. Go hide in the woods and come back with a few dead bodies." The prize for winning? You got to officially be a Spartan warrior, part of the most feared military force in ancient Greece. But, only if the slaves didn't kill you instead. Number 2. Mesoamerican ball game. Think of it as a mix between volleyball, basketball, and ritual sacrifice, where one wrong move could quite literally cost you your head. The game was played with a solid rubber ball that weighed anywhere between 4 to 9 pounds. Players were only allowed to use their hips, elbows, and knees to hit this solid, heavy ball through a high stone hoop mounted vertically on a wall. Imagine basketball, but way harder, and if you missed, there was a chance you could die. The game was often tied to religious rituals. Losing the match didn't mean simply losing your spot in the standings. It could mean losing your head, depending on the stakes. In some variations, the captain of the losing team was simply executed, or, in other cases, the winning team would be sacrificed in honor of the gods. Imagine a professional basketball player draining a three-pointer and then the crowd cheering as he's led away for a ritual sacrifice. But wait, it gets weirder. Some scholars suggest that in certain ritual games, the participants volunteered, knowing they could be sacrificed, believing that this was an honorable way to secure a VIP pass to the afterlife. Number 3. Pancration. Next up, we have the ancient Greek version of MMA. Pancration translates to all powers, or all strength, and that's exactly what it was. It was essentially a blend of boxing and wrestling with one big twist. There were almost no rules. You could punch, kick, throw, choke, and just generally ruin someone's week. The only things that were strictly prohibited were biting and eye gouging. But let's be honest, people still did that too if the referee was distracted. Now, these fights didn't stop until one guy either gave up, typically by raising a finger, or simply died. There was one legendary fighter named Orician of Phegalia who managed to win posthumously. He was being strangled to death, but as he was slipping away, he twisted his opponent's ankle so violently that the other guy tapped out. Technically, Orician won, but he immediately collapsed and died. The judges were like, "Welp, rules are rules," and gave the victory to his corpse. They even built him a statue, because nothing says legend like winning a sport after your death. Number 4. Egyptian fishermen jousting. Traveling further back in time, we find ourselves along the banks of the Nile River. Imagine kayaking, except your boat is a rickety reed raft, and instead of paddles, you're armed with a pointy stick, and the goal is to knock your opponent into crocodile-infested waters. Sounds like a perfect summer afternoon, right? The rules were simple. 2 fishermen, each in a small boat, would try to knock each other into the water using long poles. This was less of a formal sport and more of a manhood test. The Egyptians depicted these jousts on tomb paintings, showing the fishermen striking each other, with one inevitably toppling into the water while the victorious rower raised their pole in triumph. And keep in mind, this wasn't some fancy Venetian canal. The Nile was full of angry hippos and hungry crocodiles, so the stakes were a little higher than just getting wet. You didn't just lose a game, you might lose a limb or your life. Number 5. Venice Bridge Battles. You see, Venice isn't just famous for its canals and romantic gondola rides. It was also known for its love of medieval turf wars, where teams of young men would gather to try and beat the snot out of each other for control of a bridge. Picture two teams, often composed of the different districts of Venice, each made up of dozens, sometimes even hundreds, of fighters. The goal? To push the other team off the bridge and claim it as your own. There were no weapons allowed, but that didn't mean it was a peaceful event. People would throw punches, kicks, and just about anything else that would send their opponents flying into the canal below. And unlike the romantic gondola rides of today, falling in the canal back then meant you got a mouthful of Venice's finest medieval sewage. And the Venetians loved it. They'd gather on the banks to watch, cheer, and probably place bets on which team would be victorious, or which unfortunate soul would fall and have to doggy paddle back home. Eventually, authorities had to step in because, shockingly, people kept getting seriously hurt. Number 6. Chariot racing. This was a sport that somehow combined the elegance of horses with the death toll of a small war. Chariot racing was the most popular sport in ancient Rome, held in the massive Circus Maximus, which could hold around 150,000 screening fans. It was the Roman version of NASCAR, except with a higher chance that a guy would get thrown from his ride and trampled by several tons of horseflesh. The racers, called aurei, were usually slaves or freedmen, which makes sense because, no sane Roman citizen would sign up for that job. The main goal was to complete 7 laps around the massive track, often at breakneck speeds. All while other chariots tried to run you. Your horses were getting spooked, and the crowd was throwing who knows what at you. The spina, a central barrier, was also decorated with sharp obelisks and statues, just in case your chariot flipped and you needed to make things a little more fatal. The racers were often paid handsomely, and some even won their freedom. But a slight miscalculation usually meant ending up with some extra holes in your body. Thanks for watching. See the video on your screen? Well, YouTube thinks this one might interest you as well, so go ahead and check it out if you like.